Welcome to the Blind Apex Podcast, where amateur club racers tune in to get faster.
This episode is brought to you by Deechworks Fuel Systems. Visit deechworks.com for all your fuel system needs. On this episode of the Blind Apex Podcast, we're going to talk about 200 treadwear tires. You know, those tires that can be as fast as our R comps, maybe faster, and usually cheaper. Joining me to discuss this topic, One Lap of America fanatic, GRM contributor and tire tester, someone with a very track-centric and diverse garage, assuming he still has the McLaren. Andy Hollis, welcome to the podcast, sir.
Thanks for having me. Happy to be here and excited to talk about tires. Always want to talk about tires.
Yeah. So I want to get into your background, but just so people know, you have at least 20 tire comparisons up on the GRM website alone, and probably 5 or more tire best practices kinds of articles up there. So if you didn't hear it here, just search Grassroots Motorsports and Andy Hollis, and you're going to come up with them, or Andy Hollis and tires, and it'll come up.
Yeah, I've been doing that quite some time. It just kind of evolved out of some other stuff that I was doing, but testing for myself, and then little by little started into the magazine and got involved with them, and first it was one test in 2 years, and then it was one a year, and then it was one every 3 months, and sometimes this past year I think we did 7 tire tests, something like that. It's been pretty crazy. So I've been doing the tire testing gig now for GRM for quite some time, and I've had my hands on pretty much every tire that's relevant to motorsports. Be they R comps, slicks, 200 treadwear, even some 300 treadwear stuff. My background these days, I'm in addition to doing the tire testing stuff, because I go to the track all the time. I'm fortunate to be retired now from work, and so there's a local track near us that I get to go down to pretty much anytime I want. There's other than a couple of days they reserve a week for motorcycles. Other than that, it's open to members, and I can go down there. And so long as the weather's appropriate and all, I can get a lot of work done, i.e. testing or just enjoying myself in some of my own cars. But I'm also competing in time attack events these days in a variety of vehicles, and have been doing that for quite some time, and had some good success there. Won a bunch of time trial nationals. I could have been much undefeated at that. Prior to that stuff, I was doing a lot of autocross. So for about 30 years, did SCCA national level autocross and pro solo with a number of national championships there. But the more important part is I've always developed and built my own cars. And so I basically learned a lot about race engineering, which is how to properly predict, test, and evaluate changes to the vehicles. In fact, I used to teach a setup class for the Evolution Performance Driving School all around the country, which not only helped me help other people learn how to do that, but having access to those sites and the time and all allowed me to refine my own techniques and get a lot of my own testing done using those venues while I was teaching other people. So it actually kind of worked out great. And nowadays I do a lot of that similar testing at my local track, with that unlimited access. And then somewhere along the lines, I also got to do a stint in pro racing as a race engineer in Pirelli World Challenge with Tom O'Gorman, where we won two year-end championships out of the 3 years that we ran, running touring cars in a factory-backed Honda program. And so a lot of experience at doing the race engineering thing and doing testing. And we've developed a pretty rigorous process now for doing it. But also in being around for all those years, I've kind of gotten a good experience with all of the different types of tires back to the earliest, R comp days and things like that. And so it's it's been kind of interesting to watch how all of that has changed. And in fact, how things cycle in and out, both with respect to the rules makers and the tire makers, and how they kind of battle each other over time.
In this year, 2024, the world is our oyster for tires, and the rules people know it. So they're definitely looking at those tires.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's things in a lot of ways have stabilized lately. But we'll get into a little later. I think that might just be about to get shook up a little bit more, but we'll save that conversation for a little bit later.
So I probably inadvertently participated in some of your personal car testing, because I'm pretty sure you were using my RSP manifold. I'm pretty sure I shipped you my RSP manifold like 10 years ago. So you could test it on either the Miata or the CRX. I can't remember what you were testing on, but
yeah, that was one. It was going to go on. I think I was actually working on the Miata at the time, but eventually the plan was to put it on the CRX because packaging wise, it fits under the hood way better than some of the other that was available. I was using an RRC manifold at the time, and actually I have dyno tests of that. Comparing that manifold to one of the other ones I had at the time. Back in those days, I had a friend who owned a dyno, and I learned a lot of things about K-series motors. I think I probably did 200 dyno runs on his dyno, learning all kinds of different things about what would work with those motors and what wouldn't. So that was kind of a fun time.
Yeah. I just, you were talking about your process and evaluating things, and you're definitely extensive. My participation wasn't in your tire testing, but it was in another testing piece for you. So.
Well, you have to be rigorous about it if you want to get good data. That said, one of the things I always try to make clear to people is what we do at GRM is one single data point. It is not the be all end all. It is one single point using that particular car, that particular day, that particular track, that particular setup. Now, that said, we try to make sure that the cars we use are well set up so they don't have any Achilles heels necessarily. And we try to make sure that we're using the track when it's very consistent and that we're using appropriate weather conditions, not way too hot or something like that, or way too cold, those sorts of things to make sure we get data that's usable by more people. But it really is only one data point. And so the goal would be, let's say there's 30 different choices of tires that you might be wanting to put on your car these days. This will let you nail it or whittle it down to maybe 2 or 3 possible contenders that maybe you can then get access to yourself to do your own personal program of testing. It's way easier than just looking at a menu with 30 different things on it and go, I don't even know where to start. So that's really the goal. Now, that said, not everybody has the ability or the access or the resources to do their own testing. So using our results as a strict guide isn't a bad thing. And the good news is that these days there's a number of pretty clear choices for different circumstances as to what you want to do.
For sure. The early days of 200 treadwear, you said you were autocrossing it for 30 years. And 20 something years ago, I was sort of autocrossing, building a white CRX of my own. And the 200 treadwears were just sort of around back then. Can you explain how those things popped up to us?
Well, so to talk about the 200 treadwear stuff, you first have to understand how we kind of got there. I actually did a research project last fall when we were writing a story on how the treadwear ratings and stuff come about and how rules makers ended up on that. And in doing it, I went through and did a bunch of research to figure out and put actual dates on things that I had remembered, because I've been doing this since 1978. And around that time is when the very first, what we now call RComps, came about. So prior to 79, the autocross rules weren't really stabilized nationally. And so it was very regionalized and every region had kind of different things. Once SCCA started to take hold with a single common rule set, one of the things that was always important to them was that the cars be relatively streetable, at least in all the classes other than the prepared classes where you're running on slicks and stuff. So they came up with this idea of an exclusion list, which to this day exists in the rule book, although I don't really think there's much on it anymore. But at one point in time, they literally just listed out all these tires like Hoosier, M&H, McCreary, all these other, R-Comp tires. They specifically excluded them. And so everything else they considered, okay, that's a real street tire. And it was that way for a couple of years until Yokohama, they had a street tire, a legitimate street tire called the A001, and they made the A001R where they just put a different compound on it. And for whatever reason, SCCA did not ban that tire, did not put it on the exclusion list. And in fact, within a year or two, Yokohama became the title sponsor of SCCA Solo Nationals and offered on-site competitor support and all this other stuff. So whether the two of those things are combined or not, maybe not. And shortly thereafter, they had the 8R, 008R. And then that begat the very first of the tire wars. So shortly after Yokohama started really taking hold of that market, and you got to remember, in those days, this is before the internet and all that kind of stuff. So, magazines were where people saw the information, and the results of national autocross competitions had quite a bit of sway, as did showroom stock road racing. So Goodyear was the next one to jump in, and they built special versions of their, they had the Gatorback VR50, VR60 tires, and they built special versions of those that came in multiple compounds. And the crazy thing with those was, I lived through all this. I had guys that were contract drivers there. Again, no internet, no email. You had to call an 800 number with your name had to be on the list. And the way you got to be a contract driver was through the mail. Like you mailed in a proposal. Some guy mailed you back a thing and said, okay, we like you. Here's the phone number to call. Call Joe at this number and he'll send you tires. And so Goodyear was doing that. They started around 1985 doing that. BF Goodrich then jumped in 86 with what they call the CompTIA R1. And it was available in two different compounds, road race and autocross. And in fact, my wife and I were contract drivers for BF Goodrich, and that program lasted for quite a bit of time. And they evolved the tires at least once a year, if not multiple times during the year. And being a contract driver, you'd get access to those new ones. And by the way, this was all perfectly legit within the rules that existed at the time. If you look at the rules we have now in SCCA Solo, every single one of those rules that you look at, you go, why is that there? There's a specific story behind each one of the lines in that rule book as to something some manufacturer or competitor did, and why that rule is in there. So, for example, special compounds arriving just for NOLA Nationals was perfectly legit in those days. Eventually that, the rules, came to outlaw that. Same thing with special tires for special people. Certain people, there would be tires with their name on them in the trailer at a big event, and that was the only guy that got that set of tires, which obviously isn't particularly fair, but in those days, that was all completely legit. So this is back in the mid-'80s. Yokohama continued to iterate. Then we got Kumho jumping in with the Victor Racer, which was a huge step up, from everything else. But if you look at a picture of a Victor Racer, and if you ever drove on one, it's still very much a street tire. And in fact, I wish I had, some hermetically sealed versions of some of these old tires to compare to what we have now. And I don't think there'd be a whole lot difference, but they just called them something different in those days. Nobody cared about, the rules didn't care about treadwear numbers. They just need to have a DOT stamp on them and not be on the exclusion list. And the exclusion list was how the rules makers kept the very much, slicks with a DOT stamp like a Hoosier, off of people's cars. The problem was the manufacturers just kept pushing the limits and pushing the limits and pushing the limits on what was considered a street tire. So, for example, the autocross compound of those BFGs that we were doing was towards the very end, the stickiest versions of those things. Basically, you would leave all the tread on them if you were going to run them in the rain. If you weren't, you would shave them to no more than 3/32 of tread. And what we used to do on Pro Solo Sunday mornings was we would do what we called shave to win. And we would literally shave all of the tread off of the tire, put them on the car, and then go run Sunday morning and then the challenge rounds. And the tire was always faster that way. It was lighter. It didn't have as much squirm. The compound worked better. It was just crazy. But the amount of support money that was in there through advertising was huge in those days. And so the rules makers just kind of threw up their hands. This was around 96 when it really, really came to a head. They threw up their hands and said, you know what? This whole exclusion list thing is kind of silly because we can't police this. So they just, all those companies that run the exclusion list, like Hoosier and stuff, they said, you know what? Fine. Come in, do whatever you want. As long as it's got a DOT stamp, we're okay. And so then Hoosier pretty much then started to work on their tire because they, for a while, had just, not really spent much time on it. So they kept working on it. And by, let's say 2005, 2006, they finally got up to like the A3SO5, A3SO6. Well, actually, they called it the A6, and then eventually the A7. They basically won that war. They beat down Kumho. Everybody else left. BF Goodrich left. Everybody else left. And Hoosier basically just owned that whole market. The problem was Hoosier doesn't make street tires. Hoosier makes they're a race tire company, and their pricing is like a race tire company because they can't afford to subsidize the cost of these tires just to get sell on, or win on Sunday, sell on Monday effects, which is what was going on back in the day. In fact, I'm trying to remember that the numbers BF Goodrich was tossing around behind the scenes. I think their tires were subsidized upwards of 30 to 50%, is what we were paying for them based on what they cost to make, not even a profit margin. So Hoosier couldn't do that as a little company making race tires, but they built the best tires, the fastest tires. And so by those times in the early 2000s, 2005, 2006, they basically owned that market. The problem with that was they cost a lot and they didn't last very long. And so people started voting with their feet in the classes, the stock classes where those tires were legal. More and more people were just getting fed up with it. And a parallel effort, SEC had kind of seen this coming, and they started back in 98 with a new experimental class, single class called street touring, which is where the street tire, what we now know as 200 treadwear tires, came from. Although interesting, the original treadwear rating was 140. And they chose that because it was just high enough to keep all of the DOT tires like Hoosier and Kumho and stuff like that, to keep them off, make sure they weren't legal. So that's how that number came about. It wasn't really chosen as some scientific method. But in those days, real street tires, those weren't even all that cheap either. So like Michelin had a tire, what was it? The MXX3 Pilot Sport, something or other. Yokohama had a tire. But they were cheaper than Hoosier, but they weren't like what came next. The whole thing really came to head in 2002. So that's where what we know today as 200 treadwear street tires really came to the head. And that was the Falcon Azenas RT215. And that delivered amazing performance at a budget price. And it wasn't like Falcon saw the market and built the tire. It was a tire that was built for a different market in their home market in Asia. And it just happened to work for what we did. Somebody decided to bring it into the country. And it just, that was the beginning of the whole thing, just kind of swelled from there. So more classes got added. Street touring became a category, not just a single class. We had STX, STU, STS2, blah, 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 blah. And all that was going on as people were getting fed up with what was going on in stock. So more and more people left stock, went to run street touring, and basically voting with their feet. And it just, it went crazy. And it took until 2014 before SECA finally saw that trend and overhauled the stock card category allowances, including adopting the street tire, 140 street tire restriction. And again, it was 140 at that time. It had worked just fine. And so they decided that was going to be the thing. Interestingly, and as is well known nowadays, in 2015, they actually bumped the treadwear to 200 because they started going, wait, some new tires are coming out and we want to give ourselves some headroom. Interestingly, two tires, the Toyo R1R and the Hankook RS3, which were both popular at the time, suddenly changed their treadwear ratings.
Magic.
And of course, right. Now, and there's a lot more, and we could talk about that forever. Again, I did a story, which you can find on the GRM website, about treadwear ratings, where they come from and all like that. And there really are tests that have to happen and all that kind of stuff. The problem is the NHTSA, the federal government, actually does no back-end checking of what you do. So if you're a tire manufacturer and you say it meets this number, they don't check your work. Technically, you're supposed to run all these tests and stuff, and those tests exist. And tires that are OE on your car and things like that with manufacturer involvement behind them, those all get tested for sure. And all the big companies, they absolutely test. But you don't have to. You can get away with not doing it. And there are certainly been some examples, particularly of late, that it's may not have happened. Anyway, so that's kind of the history of how we got to where we are today. But honestly, these days we're pretty stable. We're, for the last 2, 3, 4 years, nothing really has changed a whole lot. I mean, we got the revised version of the Nankang CRS that came out, but it really wasn't any faster than the existing, top dog, the A052. And of course, we got the RE71 RS. And again, it didn't push the boundary any. Each of those tires is very similar on single lap pace. They just have different heat characteristics, heat tolerances, heat needs. And obviously their handling personalities are somewhat different as well. But on a good car with good camber, good wheel widths and all like that, you can turn the same lap times with all of those. So we've kind of, some people like to think we're in a tire war, and I'm like, nah, I think we're in detente right now. So there's some saber rattling going on. And the thing about the tires too is that there's an iteration process of about 4 to 6 years where new tire models, the old tire model goes away and a new one comes out from the same company. And usually it's not because they somehow magically made the tire better. There's some technology thing that allowed them to make a tire either wear longer, or maybe it's better, more durable, or maybe it's just a little bit better grip, or maybe it's a little bit of each. Sometimes they, fix some handling discrepancies and things like that. A lot of that stuff is compounding technology, but some of it is stuff they do in the carcass, and a lot of that is due to more recent advances in computer modeling, where they can model what's going on inside of a tire. Because for the longest time, tires were just freaking black magic. They couldn't scientifically model what was really going on. And so what they would do was just try stuff. And they had guys that were just smart guys and experienced that knew, if I change the belt angles like this, I kind of get this effect. And so they would build 5 different versions of the tire with slightly different belt angles, hand them off the test drivers and see what happened. In fact, I was involved with some of that kind of work back in the BFG R1 RComp days, did some development work with those guys where we would do blind testing on a variety of different spec tires. Looked the same on the outside, but they were all different inside. And you would basically get lap times and also give, subjective feedback on the tires. And that was some of my first tire testing. And I kind of learned, from the pros how to do that sort of thing. So anyway, that's kind of a history of how we got there, where we kind of are today. I think we're kind of in a golden era right now. Lots of choices.
Yeah, I would agree with you that we're in a golden era, and it's more of a cold war between all the manufacturers. They're all sort of sitting back. I think that's actually going to escalate here shortly, and I think the RComp people are going to kick it off. And I think there's a thirst in the market for more 200 treadwear or new 200 treadwear, because time trials taken off. even GLTC is like only a 200 treadwear class now, right? So that's a racing group racing on 200 treadwears, and they have half of them probably not on their list. None of what people determine as the super 200 treadwears, those are definitely not on the list, but other people are looking for it. I looked for 200 treadwears just as practice tires because my R comp sizes aren't always in. And so when I go to a test day, I don't always want to use my race tires, but I wanted a tire that may act similarly. So I went searching for it. I think there's a pent up demand for it, and Toyo's putting out the new Proxy R. And I don't think if preliminary testing that, I talked to Eric Wonger about it, his preliminary testing, it's pretty close to the Hoosier, which I think Hoosier's going to come out and set the bar even higher. And then I think that's going to really shake up the 200 treadwears.
Right. So the Proxis R is, are we still on?
Yeah, we're on.
Okay. It's weird because I'm not hearing myself anymore. Okay. You can edit that part. So the Proxis R, it's interesting because they, Toyo, for whatever reason, hasn't sent us test tires on those. We've been talking to them since last February about them, and they were going to have some for us in April, and then that kind of came and went, and we inquired again, and so I'm not sure what's going on there, but the hope now is that we can get something going in the fall. So I haven't really got any good information on those, but of course those were 100 treadwear, as I recall, or maybe even 60. So I'm not sure that it's part of the 200 treadwear conversation. I will say that Hoosier can respond as far as, the A7, R7, they can respond very quickly if they need to. If somebody else comes out with something, I'm pretty confident they have things on the shelf that will improve the performance of either of those tires should the market require it. But of course, at this point, there's no point in playing those cards unless you have to, right? So I don't expect that they will unless they feel threatened in the marketplace or whatever. So they are a race tire company, and so that's they're going to put all their resources in. What's great now that they're part of Continental is they have even more resources if they need them. So it's not like the old days where they lived and died on their own products completely. They've got a little bit more freedom to experiment and things like that. And Continental very much values their contributions, both from a sort of a halo product standpoint, but also from technology. There's some technology stuff that Hoosier has that Continental valued, which was part of the they got a hold of that with part of the acquisition. So that was a big thing there. So,
well, I think some of the motivation for Toyo was how fast the 200 treadwears got. So, like the Super 200 treadwears destroy the Toyo RR in lap times.
Yeah, for sure. And we did a test on that. What was it? A year ago, maybe a year and a half ago, something like that. And if you look at, in fact, we specifically did that test based on NASA's what I call the 1.6 category. All the tires that were listed in there that got the 1.6 modifier in the ST and TT categories. And whereas all the Super 200s are in the 1.0 category. So, I mean, NASA's already figured out that, these tires are not particularly fast, but of course, Toyo and NASA have a great relationship together. And so, Toyo would much rather be perceived as a higher level company, not just one that needs to get a head start, if you will, or a performance break, a weight, power to weight break, in order to be able to perform at the same level. So I could see why they might want to do that. So we'll see, what that tire ends up, being, and that's on hopefully this fall's slate of tests, along with a couple other things that we're working with.
I can't wait. I'm a GRM member. If you're not a GRM member, you should be one. You get early access, you get better access. It's the way to go. So I can't wait to get my email that says I have a new article to read, especially on tire testing. But
yeah, for sure. As it turns out, the tire test stories be it the online versions or the versions in the hard copy magazine. And by the way, if you are a subscriber, you get access to the digital version of the magazine. So, for example, the next issue that you're going to get in your mailbox is already the digital version's already up. You can be reading that one right now today. And in fact, it's been up for, almost 2 weeks now. I mean, pretty much as soon as we ship it off to the printer, it goes online digitally. So you see it, weeks before you ever get the hard copy in your mailbox. So you can kind of go and look at that. So that current issue is the one that actually has our CRX from One Lap on it. And has the whole One Lap story, which is kind of fun.
Well, let's get into this current batch of 200 treadwears.
Sure.
What do you think is the biggest bang for the buck tire? Lord knows inflation, all that stuff. People are looking for deals, but they don't want to sacrifice too much performance.
Yeah. So for me, the sweet spot on performance, dry performance versus price and longevity is the Kuma V730. Okay. That tire is amazingly good, and it's very consistent. This is for track driving. Very consistent for full sessions. It's very heat tolerant, and they're cheap. Now, the only downside is they don't have as huge a list of sizes as a lot of other tires do. But if you can get them to fit your car, it's a great sweet spot. And so that for me, when people ask, hey, I just want to do some lapping and all, and I don't want to spend a ton of money on tires, but I want them to be consistent and all like that, and not be too much money. For me, that one, you don't lose that much performance versus the pointy end tires. What I call the big three. The big three is what I call them. A052, RE71 RS, and CRS V2. But Kuma V730 is just a little bit slower than those. But great longevity, great manners, super consistent, and all like that. A cut below those, if you want something to last even longer, you got the venerable Hankook RS4 and the Continental Extreme Contact Force. The ECF is faster than the RS4, but doesn't last quite as long. But both those tires are very popular in the endurance racing stuff. In fact, people run RS4s for like multiple weekends, which is amazing. Both of those tires are now spec tires for some of the series. The endurance series, a couple of them, Lucky Dog runs the Hankooks, and I guess WRL now runs the ECF. And they got tired of tires being a big choosing point. So they finally just standardized, said, okay, everybody's going to run these. And it's actually made the racing a little more consistent and all, and a little more cost effective too, because those guys get deals, on the tires because they buy them in huge quantities. It's funny because people think like autocrossers buy a lot of tires or something like that. No, who buys a lot of tires? Endurance racing guys buy a lot of tires. I was at the WRL race at COTA last December, and there were this was back before they did the spec tire thing. There were pallets of A052s stacked up, and because those guys had figured out it's worth to do the extra pit stops to have the extra pace, and they would run A052s for the whole race, and it was insane the amount of tires they would go through in a weekend, like literally pallets of these tires. It was just crazy. So anyway, it was smart for them to do that. But anyway, if you're just looking for lapping, RS4, that things last forever. They just last forever. They're just not. You're giving up a significant pace now, versus the big three. But that's fine. And the ECF is a little faster than that. It's somewhere in between. So and again, all of these things, they're on. If you go to the GRM site and there's a tab up the top that says tire testing, click on that. Go on in all the data. There's a blurb about pretty much every single tire that's a possibility of choice. Underneath every single one is a link to whatever the most recent testing we've done on that tire is. And then there's a chart which rates each of the tires on like 6 different characteristics. And it depends on what it is that's important to you, will allow you to choose which kind of tire that you want there. And it's, the funny story behind that chart is that whole thing I wrote it in self-defense over the course, the very first version I wrote over the course of 2 hours, with zero research off the top of my head, because I got tired of answering questions on forums and Facebook pages and stuff. The same old questions. Which one's faster,
Right.
this or this? I've got this car. What should I get? And it's like, and it was just like, you know what? I'm just going to write it all in one place. And then I could just post a link every single time. And that's pretty much what I do. And in fact, what's great is other people have picked up on that. So usually when those discussions come up, somebody else comes in and does my dirty work for me and posts a link to the thing. I go, perfect. My work here is done.
You bet.
So just by keeping that thing, current, it's basically made it all work. So anyway, it's kind of fun. But anyway, not only on that particular page are links to those stories on testing, but there's also some links at the bottom which are tire related things, like how to do skid pad testing to establish tire pressures, or how to do so one of the other ones comes up all the time is like wheel widths versus tire widths, pinching tires versus stretching tires, all that kind of stuff. There's stories that we did and test stories, on that sort of thing. So tons and tons of information on there. Literally that page is the entry point to over a decade worth of good testing and research stories. So I should definitely take advantage of that. And while we're talking about that, and I said earlier, it's really our tests are only a single data point, although sometimes we'll test a particular tire more than once. The other two great resources to get more data to then compare, Tire Rack, obviously, who sells them, they have their own testing program, which used to just be autocross oriented because they had their test track, which was on site, which is basically an autocross course. They've actually started doing track testing now up at Gingerman. So now they do it a different way. They go up there and they take like a dozen tires and they spend like 3 days doing nothing but comparing all these tires, which is pretty hardcore. But again, it gives another set of data points which you can look at. Interestingly, their stuff lines up with my stuff almost perfectly. There's a few outliers here and there,
as there will be,
and they're using different. Yeah, but they're using different vehicles, different processes. Like, for example, they always use the placard pressure on the side of, in the car door jamb. You open up, it says this car takes 26 PSI cold. That's what they use because their audience is the general consumer. And so as not have a liability aspect of saying, oh, you should run these tires at 24, and then have somebody, DB the tire and sue them.
Yeah.
They always use placard pressures. But interestingly, they still get mostly the same results. Now, there's a few which can be directly attributed to that tire pressure thing. I've noticed it over the years. I'm like, I know exactly why you got that result, because this tire needs less air, that sort of thing. And then the other one, which is pretty cool, is on YouTube. There's a channel by a guy named Jonathan Benson called Tire Reviews, and it's TYRE, not TIRE, Tire Reviews. Have a look at that. It's all done on video. And interestingly, so Jonathan was in Europe. He lived in Europe. But he recently has relocated to the U.S. So he's actually living out in Utah now, near Miller Motorsports Park, I guess UMC they call it now. So now he has access to a lot of the U.S. tires that he didn't have access to before. Usually it was all European versions of tires, but he's got some great data and stuff. So those are the other two whose methodologies I believe strongly in as being very scientific and not being biased by a supplier or something like that, or a sponsorship, or being a shop, that sells a brand versus another brand, all that kind of stuff. So, which is what most of the testing out there is, or it's a user who just throws a set of tires on and says, here's what I got. But those are the other two. Between the three, you can get 3 good data points, and it starts becoming pretty obvious what you need to be doing.
Yeah, I definitely use the GRM, the wheel width testing you guys did. I think Tire Rack has a wheel width test.
Yes, they do.
So I was looking at that. I didn't get a third point, but I figured you guys overlapped well enough that I was settled on the sizes for the tire or the wheel that I'm required to run. So I figured
Right.
I was in the zone. That's close enough, good enough for me. I'm fine with that. But yeah, the more data you can churn and the more input you can have, because everybody's circumstance is a little different. You're looking for tires for at least 3 different cars, right? So you have the Miata, the CRX, and the McLaren that you're trying to put tires on. None of those are my car.
So I actually have 2 CRXs.
You got to collect them all. They're like Pokemon. You better be careful.
I have the case. Yeah, I have the K swaps car that we ran for one lap a bunch, and then I have a B swap car, which is the one I've been running at time trial nationals each of the last 3 years or last 2 years. I'm going to run it again this year. So it just fits into the what's called the Max 5 class really well, and so I built that car. That was my COVID project. I had a spare chassis sitting outside, and I came across basically it was a part out from an old race car just been sitting there. It was a JDM B18C Type R motor, including the matching limited slip transmission, the whole 9 yards, in perfect condition. And B series stuff has gotten really expensive lately, but the guy sold it to me at a reasonable price, and he even dynoed it ahead of time so I could both verify that it was in good shape and all. It was James Houghton, time with that guy from up in Canada. Anyway, he shipped it down to me, and I installed that in that car and built that car during the whole pandemic time. Gave me something to do, and so then I ran it at Time Trial Nationals and had a good time with it. So that was kind of fun.
Awesome. So I have some pointed questions for tips on 200 treadwears or for 200 treadwear drivers.
Sure.
Should we be paying to get them heat cycled before we run them?
So my answer to lots of these things is It depends. So in general, heat cycling is certainly not going to hurt your tires. If you can do it yourself properly, you don't need to pay somebody else to do it. And I do all my own. When we do tire tests, it takes multiple days for me to get the test done, because what I do is I put them on the car, I drive them 45 minutes down to the track, I do 6 laps of ever increasing pace, bringing them up to almost 100%, being careful not to slide them around, drive them home, take them off the car, let them sit. And that's the best way you can do it, because then they're cycled in on your car and everything else. Tire Rack has a process where they simulate that, where they basically put them on a machine that pressurizes them against a drum and spins them up for, I forget how long they do it, but it's a decent amount of time, 30 minutes maybe. Well, I watched them do that one. I got a tour of the place, I don't know, 8 years ago or something, and they showed me how they did it. It's really cool. If you don't have the resources to do it properly, then you pay them whatever it is, $15 or something a tire to do it, and then they're fine. There are certain tires where I would absolutely say you need to absolutely heat cycle this tire before you hammer on it. Falcon RT660 is one of them. So many cases I've seen of people with delamination, center rib tearing, the very first time they're used, where if you heat cycle them properly, that will minimize that. RE71RS is another one that it's way less susceptible to that, but it does it some too. And heat cycling those will help that as well.
Does it just help finish the galvanizing process of the rubber?
Yeah. So if you go to Tire Rack and do a search on heat cycling, it'll actually talk about it. And there's an old article. I should get it linked off the GRM site that when they first developed this process, John Radstetter, who used to be in charge of all their testing stuff, he was the guy that developed their heat cycling process. And they did a test with BF Goodrich where they took tires that were cycled and not cycled, or cycled on the street, not cycled at all, and then also done using this machine. And they saw distinct differences both in performance and longevity on the tires, but they saw no difference in tires that were heat cycled by the user versus the one that was done by the machine. So there was a machine was doing just as good a job as you could, both of which were processes that were better than just putting them on the car and running them. And I've also seen a number of tires that specifically will just get faster. So Nankangs are a really good example of that, particularly the old AR1s. but also even the CRS V2s. Those definitely get quicker after a heat cycle or two. A052s, same thing. They'll get quicker. So it's worth doing it. It really is worth doing it, in my opinion. We all got kind of used to, back in the RE71R, not the RS, but the R, and the BF Goodrich Rival S and the Rival S 1.5, those tires didn't really care as much about it, other than getting the mold release off the tire. So we all kind of got lazy and used to not doing it. Which brings me up to the other point, which is shaving. Those were also tires that didn't really care whether they were shaved or not. The new stuff, we're back to tires make a difference being shaved. And we did a story on that. I did some long-term testing just on wearing them down to a certain level. But I've got tires. My quickest times ever on Yoke's RE71RS and CRS V2s are all at 1/32 that were worn down to that level. And I mean a lot faster, like a second faster than brand new, more than that even. It makes a big difference. And they're more consistent. So for example, I could get like 5-6 really good laps out of an A052 instead of 1 or 2 maybe. It helps with that consistency across the session. Now, conversely, something like a CRS V2, which needs a little heat to get going, when you get them down to that level, you need a few more laps to get them in the window, and they get really edgy because they needed that squirm to keep them warm all the time as you're driving them. So they get harder to extract their performance out of them. They're fast, but they're harder. That just being the Nankang. That was not true of the other two. They were not nearly like that, because A052 is pretty mushy anyway. So this basically just makes it a way better tire when there's less tread on it. So when people ask me, hey, I'm going to Solon Nationals, I say, if you're running A052, get a set shaved and heat cycle. Pay the man to do it, and then put them on your car. Go put 4 runs on the test course just to burn them into your car, get the wear pattern right, and then go win nationals.
Yeah, I always heat cycle all my stuff, but I don't have a street car to run them on, so that's why I do it. I really don't have the option.
Yeah, pay the man.
Yeah. So my last pointed question in this tips is, how do you determine your hot pressure goals in all of these tests that you've been doing?
Right. So it used to be when we had access to the Mineral Wells site, we would always do both autocross and track testing. We do autocross testing first, and that site had a skid pad that we had painted down there years ago for that evolution school that I used to teach in a setup school. We had a skid pad. So we'd go up there and we would literally run sessions up and down pressure. So we would start way too high at 36 pounds cold, and run the tires at that pressure, and we'd knock 4 PSI out, then knock 4 more, then 4 more, then 4 more. And eventually it would, typically they would get faster for a while, then it would get slower again. It formed like a bell curve. And what was interesting about it is pretty much all these 200 treadboard tires were generating almost the exact same curve. And some of that was probably the car we were using. The Miata is way less pressure sensitive when you have a lot of wheel width to support the sidewall. I mean, pressures get way more sensitive when you start pinching a tire or you don't have enough camber and all that kind of stuff. Then you have to use pressure as a crutch, a fallback to compensate for the fact that the car doesn't have an optimal setup on it. But if it does, the pressures we were finding were somewhere around, at least on that car, somewhere around 28 PSI hot, being the number, which we usually started around 24 to get there. And the other interesting thing was that there'd be a good plus or minus 3 PSI where it just didn't matter on pace.
That's a pretty wide window.
What we've done, it's a huge window. Now the feel might be a little different, and one thing may agree with you that versus another. But because we found that, we got to the point where when we lost that site, I was like, you know what? I can't do anything about that anymore. We can't do that testing anymore. So the dirty little secret is we pretty much these days just set them at those numbers. I'll occasionally go back later and try some different things. If the thing I've learned to do is read a tire. I can look at the wear on a tire. I actually learned this from the noted IMSA race engineer, Jeff Braun. He doesn't use pyrometers. I don't use pyrometers. I've learned to read a tire. And it's a developed skill. It takes a long time to do it, but you can look at a tire and determine how it's wearing, and determine your camber settings, your air pressures. It takes a little bit of running to do it. You're not going to get it in 6 laps, but you put a little time on the tire, you can read that stuff. So anyway, that's what we've been doing lately. And it's very rare that we find a tire that is outside that window. The one performance-wise, sometimes it'll affect the wear. So the Falcon is one that really needed a little bit more air than that. And so we ended when we started running ours. So I had a set of those because the test, I end up with a lot of test tires, right? They got to get burned up. So they end up on my car, and I go down to the track, once or twice a week and burn them up. And I found that tire needed a little bit more air just to be a little more consistent as far as the wear went. And so it didn't affect the performance that much, but it wanted a couple of PSI more. So, but yeah, that's the way we're doing it these days. And I've yet to, now I take it back. The one other thing we'll do, some manufacturers will give us advice. They will say, hey, this tire needs to be here, blah, blah, blah. And so if they give us specific numbers, we use their numbers. Interestingly, most of the time when they give you the numbers, it's the same thing we're already doing. So, it may vary by 2 PSI or something, but it really doesn't matter.
Yeah, but 2 PSI is in your zone already, so it's pretty close.
Exactly. Exactly. So they may say, hey, 30. Okay, whatever. But we'll do it because they gave us that recommendation. I'm like, okay, I'm going to use your data and do it. But yeah, what you want to do, if you're not, that's how we're doing it. But if you want to do it, what we used to do, in pro racing and all is we did, where we didn't have access to a skid pad, we did pressure sweeps. And that's the way you do it is you go out and you do, you need to have somebody, an engineer working with you, but your driver goes out, comes in, you add say 3 PSI, go out, come back in, get lap times, get data, check with a pyrometer, see what the driver's doing. Because ultimately what I care about is not what the pyrometer says. I don't want necessarily to make the pyrometer happy. I want to make the timer happy. I want to make the lap timer happy. So even if the pyrometer says one thing, but the lap times are getting better, that's all I care, which is what we used to do on the skid pads. We cared not about what the pyrometer said. We took temperatures and wrote them down, but what we cared about was the lap timer. And oftentimes what looked like technically better data on the pyrometer was not better, was not faster. So what matters is, so a pyrometer can give you some direction perhaps on things to try, but ultimately what we care about is lap times. But you got to be a consistent driver in consistent conditions for those lap times to be meaningful.
Yes, sir. That's a key.
So, yeah. And it's like, so I'm fortunate, at Harris Hill, I have thousands and thousands of laps down there. Most of them in that Miata. Actually the CRX has quite a few there too. So, but it's because of that, I can be super consistent. You see this stuff in the tests we do, and I'll put down 6 laps all within a tenth of a second. And it's just from, having run there so much, that you're able to do that. So if I make a change in the car, it's going to show up. So that's the way that most people are going to need to do is do pressure sweeps. Add 3 PSI, take 3 PSI out, and make big changes. 1, 2 PSI is just not a lot. 3 to 4, you make a big change. So you can notice the effect. What does it feel like? Am I moving in the right direction? Go over the edge until the car gets slower. Go over the edge the other way until the car gets slower. Learn where the zone is. And then you can play with those pressures just to get a different feel if you want, because sometimes that's what you'll get.
That's an excellent tip. Excellent tip. People do it with shocks, so why wouldn't you try to do it with your tires? So,
well, sure. A tire is a spring, It's actually an undamped spring, which can cause problems in stiff cars. But it's you're changing the spring rate by adding air to the tire or taking air out of the tire, particularly when you do significant. And that was one of the old front wheel drive tricks back in the stock and now street category was pumping up the rear tires to like 60 psi. Because you weren't allowed to change the spring rate, and you only had so much shock. So you would put a metric ton of pressure in the rear tire, and all of a sudden the car would rotate. And it worked great. Worked a treat.
I'm sure, but I'm sure it was a handful too. But.
Well, you can dial that back too. I mean, pick a number. I mean, if 32 or whatever 28 was maximum, add 10 psi and see what it feels like. And you'll get a difference. You'll get some kind of a difference. You might not like it, but if you're not, this isn't totally tire specific, but anytime you're making any sort of setup change to the car, when you're testing, make a big change so you can tell the difference. People that get to a shock and make a 1 or 2 click adjustment on the shock, no, like turn it 30% of its adjustment range, so you're going to feel it, make a big change. People add 50 pounds to a spring. It's like, yeah, add 100 pounds to a spring, make a big change. And that way you'll know, are you at least in the right direction? Then you can zero in on, fine tuning it. But you're not going to make fine tuning changes and get the right answer. Not easily. Most people don't have that calibrated of a finely calibrated of a butt dyno in order to be able to figure that out.
Yeah, I don't. So, and you're right. You have to be super consistent if you're going to make minute changes. So if you're not that consistent, don't worry about being that fine, right, in your changes.
Yep, exactly.
Do you have any additional tips for those drivers in 200 treadwear tires?
Not really. Other than keep watching the market. I promised this earlier, so we may as well jump up to it. So you talked about the Toyo Proxys R, which is it's a 100 treadwear category tire. It's actually out right now, but there's not a lot of test data out there, and we're hoping to get that one. But there's another 200 treadwear tire coming out. I'm headed to the launch event for it in the middle of next month, and it's from one of the major players, and they're talking a big story. I think they have the technology to back it up based on some other things they've done in the past, and it could definitely make some waves. It is more of a track-oriented tire when it comes to like the heat needs. So, for example, like a CRS V2 needs a little heat to come in and all like that. So it's not usually a great autocross tire, unless maybe on the front of a front-wheel drive car where you can burn it down and get it into the window. But this tire will be a little more like that, where you've got to get a little bit of temperature into it for it to activate. But the kind of relative performance they're talking about sounds pretty darn good. And so I'm pretty excited about it. If it really delivers the way they say, and again, we're talking with marketing people
right.
and stuff, and they're not always, their job is to get you excited about it. And I'm excited. So they've done their job. Now the question is whether the tire actually delivers exactly what they're saying. But maybe we'll have the big four. Maybe we'll have.
Oh, that sounds like
a new number.
Maybe too much of a hint.
Maybe. Well, there's at least a dozen tire manufacturers out there that are quite good. Some of whom have not done anything new in a while. And you can remember I said there's that 5-6 year cycle. Go look at who hasn't done anything in the last 5 or 6 years. You can get some ideas. So anyway, I'm pretty excited about trying these things out, and I'm supposed to get a test set here, hopefully by the end of this month. I'd like to actually get my hands on them before the launch event, so that we can synchronize our data with theirs. But I'm not sure that'll actually happen. So they're trying to build inventory now so that when they announce this thing, it's always tricky. Like they had been planning on building inventory throughout the summer, and of course, there's always delays and things and materials problems and stuff, and which has been badgering that industry for the last couple of years since the pandemic. And so they've been slow to build inventories. They want to make sure they have tires to sell when the marketing guys, do their dog and pony show. Otherwise, it's going to be, hey, here's this cool tire that we can't sell.
Yeah, it'll get messy.
Yes, it would. So anyway, they're all hands on deck to get tires made in order to do that. And so, and the good news is that in that time frame, it'll if it truly is a contender, it'll be well before the January 1 cutoff dates for rules eligibility. Everybody will have a good vision as to what the tire is and its performance, so that there's no last minute hang-ups on that like we got into last year where stuff showed up at the last second. So this way the rules makers will have a good look and can decide what they want to do with it. So anyway, real excited and can't wait to see it. So keep watching that GRM website. It'll or email list, and the data will show up pretty quickly. For
sure. I'll be glued to it. My question is, if the hype train is real, is this the first shot of the next 200 treadwear war?
Could be.
All right.
Could be. And that's the thing. It remains to be seen. Totally remains to be seen. Whether it is or not. And, let's just say it was tremendously faster. Do the rules makers say, hey, too far? We've seen this before. And that's why I gave that little history lesson before, is that, that's part of the reason why they did this January 1 thing, is so they can evaluate things for the coming year before people are actually buying them and running them and stuff like that. And the earlier in the previous year that the tire comes out, the more data they're going to have and the more effective decision they can make on what it is. And they've shown the propensity to be a little conservative on that lately. They don't like surprises. And so they want to be able to know for sure what they're allowing. And so it'll be interesting to see how they will react to it as well. I'm glad I don't do that job anymore. I did that job for like 20 years.
It's no fun.
It's a thankless job. Oh, it's a thankless job. You're lucky to keep half of the people happy most of the time. You're lucky if you do that. If you do that, you're doing well. And generally, more than 50% of the people are unhappy. And so it's just going to be that way. So anyway, but yeah, exciting times.
Awesome. Where can people find you if they want to get in contact with you?
Simplest way is through Grassroots. There's on the masthead somewhere. There's an email there that you can get a hold. But I'm also available on Facebook and stuff, and so you can Facebook Messenger me and things like that. And of course, all the material is up there on the GRM website under the tire testing tab. But if and a lot of times if you put a comment, so all the stories, the way the GRM site works is any story that's put up is automatically stuck onto the message board. And there's a comment section below it. And I tend to monitor that whenever it's one of the tire testing stories. And periodically, they'll send out like a news story comes up right away. And I typically respond to comments that put up there. They'll rehash those stories and put them out again, every, 6 to 12 months, like a story from 6 months ago, they'll put it out on email again and they'll stick it up on the front page again. And it just sort of refreshes its position on the board. So I'll see it again, and people will sometimes ask a new question about that they didn't know about 6 months prior, and they'll ask a question, and I'll tend to respond to those. So that's one of the easiest ways. But there's also some kind of an email thing that you can send. If you look through the masthead, there's a thing there where you can get a hold of me. Or you can find me, like I said, on Facebook Messenger. I'll oftentimes respond to people there. But I do have limited time.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Some people try to take advantage of that. And it does get old after a while.
Well, I appreciate your time that you spent with us sharing about the 200 treadwear, the current status, and the history. So thank you so much.
Good deal. Well, thanks for having me. Enjoyed it. Good luck.
Until next time, keep working on yourself, keep working on the car, and let's get faster.